Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Keighley, and welcome to this special session, How Making Games is Set to Change. Joining me is my good friend who I've known for over 2 decades in the gaming industry. She now serves as the Chief Studios Officer at Electronic Arts. Laura Miele, welcome to GamesBeat.
Well, hello, Jeff Keighley. It's great to be here. I've had so much fun talking with you and Dean on Clubhouse. It's great to see you in person, see a face in
I was
these
gonna say
times.
we have that weekly we have a weekly clubhouse room that I do with Aaron
Yeah.
Greenberg at Xbox, and lo and behold, one week you showed up and it was great. We were at you showed up actually in the middle of when everyone was talking about how much they loved Apex, and it was not planned, but it worked
I
out
know.
really well.
It was a good time to enter. Could have been worse.
Yeah, well, believe me, Apex, such an amazing story. How that game just keeps going and going. And it actually kind of, I think, ties into what we're going to talk about today, which is how the gaming industry is constantly evolving. But what I really wanted to focus on today was sort of looking at the past year and what you guys have learned under these crazy circumstances, and also a little bit of blue sky on what the nature of how you make games and how people play them is going to change in the future. And as I said in the opening, you and I have known each other for many decades, and you've seen it all, back when you were working at Westwood Studios on RTS games
Yeah.
through now to EA, which is a creative force. How many people make games at EA now?
Well, with we closed Codemasters, and we're getting ready to partner with Glue, and so it would be about 8,000 game developers,
Wow.
Electronic Arts. I know
Amazing. Well,
something.
let, let me ask you to start off, like, in this past year with everything going on, work from home. I mean, I've been able to host broadcasts from home, but I can't imagine what it's like to build these games and ship these games. I'm sure, now a year into it, you guys have figured out a little bit how to make it happen, but what have you learned about how to make games or how to make them better in this work from home pandemic situation?
Yeah, great question. And then particularly in this past year we've had, I'm glad we're going to be talking about some blue sky ahead because that's always fun to talk about the future after the year
Yeah.
everyone's had. Yeah, I mean, gosh, just like everyone, within about a 24-hour period, we went from 22 studio locations to the 7,000 studio locations of employees that we have. We certainly learned a lot about people's kids and families and dogs and pets along the way, that's for sure. But I think that the resilience of teams was astounding. And the idea that we were able to disrupt how we do things was also incredibly productive. So we've been making games for a long time, as you mentioned, and the company's been around for almost 40 years. And so you do things in a certain way. All of a sudden, you are completely out of the office. You're completely disrupted in how you work. And I think that we were creative problem solving around things that we had never thought of before. And so I think it's going to be a highly productive new future for us to think about how to do things differently and the resilience that we can throw anything at our team members and they can take what we throw at them. One of the more interesting points, though, through all of this has been the tools that we have. And when I took on the studio responsibility a few years ago, I was very focused on improving the quality of development for our developers. And part of that was creating better tools and technology and workflows. And I think that as people are home, more independent, a little more autonomous by themselves, I think that the accessibility and intuitiveness of tools and technology as they create games is significantly important. And so that's a theme that is something that we are going to prioritize and really lean into in the coming years.
I wanted to ask you a bit about Apex. We mentioned at the start. Live service games are so prominent right now. I mean, when I look at some of the charts online of like the top games every month, it feels like 6 or 7 of them are the same games month after month because people keep playing
Yes.
Fortnite and Apex and Warzone and all these titles. How have you had to sort of shift your development philosophy because of that? Because those games, they're doing updates. It feels like every week or 2 weeks, right? I mean, there are new things
Mhm.
coming out. Was it easier to sort of adapt those live service games versus some huge story driven epic with motion capture? I know some of those teams have been more delayed. I'm curious, like the live service games, have they been easier to sort of adapt to this environment?
Well, I think that there's certainly, I mean, everything has its unique challenges, I will say. And again, these teams are incredible. We put out over
Mm.
400 live service updates last year and we launched 13 games. So 400 live service updates,
Wow.
to your point, means we are showing up every day, every week, every month for our players in these live service games. I think that the scope and the sprint to get something out is smaller and more contained for live services as you're putting out an update for sure than, to your point, working on something like we launched Star Wars Squadrons last year as an example. And that had been being worked on for years and years and years. And we got to May, the game shipped in October, and we didn't have the orchestral music recorded yet. And so we could not get an orchestra in a room at the same time. So our audio engineer recorded one instrument at a time and then
Wow.
compiled the piece and got Lucas to sign off on it. And Lucas is super particular and meticulous, Skywalker and all, about our music and sound. And so they did they did a phenomenal job. So it's things like that that the teams were incredibly scrappy about. But in the case of our live service updates, they're just smaller, more contained pieces than these large games that get worked on for years at a time. And then you get up to getting it out the door and you have big testing and big changes and just a lot of iteration that has to happen toward the end.
The, you talked about some of these franchises and big franchises like Star Wars, and EA has had a long history with Star Wars games. But I wanted to ask, as you approach shipping more games, I remember, years and years ago with the EA Games label, it felt like there was, a game coming out almost every month. And if, as you said, 13 games across the year last year for EA. Um, I'm curious, as you think going forward with these big franchises, is it about kind of building more content and on ramps to those franchises? Like I think, Apex obviously free to play was, a massive opportunity. I know you've talked about, like, I think there's an Apex mobile coming at some point this year.
Yes,
Are we going to see more of that, of different ways to sort of get into these games?
I think so. I think that that's what great franchises are about. I think great franchises have as many entry points and are meeting players where they are. So FIFA, as an example, we have free to enter, we have mobile, we certainly have the premium game, we have live services. So yes, I think big successful franchises allow for as many entry points into the game experience for players as possible. Battlefield this year, we are going to release a mobile game for Battlefield.
Oh, wow.
And you would
Okay.
imagine, yeah, we're really excited about it. The team's working on it for years. Industrial Toys out of Pasadena has been creating it and working on it for years, and we're just super excited to bring it to soft launch at the end of the summer. And I think it's going to add to the Battlefield experience. I think it's going to be really meaningful for Battlefield players, and it's going to reach a lot more players around the globe for this brand. And that's how we're thinking about all of our big blockbuster brands and franchises. Um, Free to enter business models, premium components of the game, mobile components of the game, and just getting it, like I said, in many hands on many platforms as possible.
Another thing that I see increasingly in the industry is this idea of giving players access to tools. You mentioned the importance of tools for developers. We've certainly seen Fortnite Creative. I did a thing last week on this new game, Core, this platform that kind of lets you build games. And I was thinking about,
Manticore.
EA company. It's like, pinball construction set back in the day. That was like one
Oh
of
my
the
gosh.
original EA games. It was literally like build your own pinball table. And I'm curious to get your take on this. So I think, it's always been there with like people building mods and other content around games, but I'm curious from the EA perspective, when you think of kind of design overall and where games are going, um, the concept of allowing players to build and create in these games, is that something that is on the roadmap or top of mind there?
Oh, for sure. And I love that you mentioned pinball construction set. That is definitely a blast from the past Bill badge. And of course, Sims and Sim City is just such a big part of our
That's true.
history and
Maxis, yeah.
our own origin story. Yeah, it's just, it has always been where this company has been grounded in. And I think we have a great collection of electronic artists. And I think we have always wanted everyone to be electronic artists, let everyone create and have an impact on their experiences. But to your point, it goes in waves, right? And so the industry certainly was in a place where it was these very curated linear experiences. And I think things are coming full circle and it is opening up. And we are incredibly passionate about putting capabilities and tools in the hands of players so they can have impact on their own experiences. when I look at the long range innovation projects, we have a group called SEED, the Search for Extraordinary Experiences Division, Electronic Arts, and they incubate. We have data scientists and PhDs there researching future innovations for technology and games. And one of the projects they're working on is really cool. It's this VR project where you can scan in a character and you can possess that character. And as you're walking around in the room, the program captures your animation and applies that to the character. You can draw environments. You can place a second character in the environment, interact with this character, and that is just about radical accessibility for tools and radical accessibility for people to create their experiences and have an impact on their game. And I think that is going to be incredibly important for the future. And then, of course, just complete focus on collaboration. And so you and I could be in a similar game experience, and we could collaborate, share assets, either asynchronously or in real time. I think will also be incredibly important in co-creation of experiences. So to your point, our industry has seen this in the past through mods on PC, through pinball construction set to Sims and SimCity. And I think there is going to be another pretty big evolution in our industry, and we have to be in a position to create great tools and just create capabilities for players.
And I'm curious, like tactically, you look at some of the EA franchises, and I obviously Sims is the one that naturally you sort of think about. But like a Battlefield, you mentioned, cool, you're doing mobile version. We know there's a frontline Battlefield that's a big project for EA. Your biggest title, I think, for later this year. How do you that sort of philosophy of creation? I always think of Battlefield being about the sandbox and the fun of being in there, but what does that mean for Battlefield? Does it mean like a level editor, like a Forge, or like how do you sort of take some of those ideas and apply them to like the franchises you have today?
Yeah, I love that question. Battlefield is one of my favorite franchises that we have. I've been working on it for a really long time. And one of the best things about it is that it is about a sandbox. It is in the shooter space of all the games and all the shooters. It is a sandbox that DICE has always provided players with weapons and vehicles and destruction in the environment. And then these crazy only in Battlefield moments happen. This emergent play comes from players. And so as you can imagine, the taking that strength and taking that superpower in this franchise and building on that in the future game is definitely part of our strategy. So new modes that are going to be added to the game experience are really in service of this this ability that we want to give players to have a bigger impact on their experience.
Wow. Well, I cannot wait because, as you said, it really is this playground of sort of destruction and fun is what we've come to expect from Battlefield. On another note, I talk a little bit about Sims. You mentioned that, which is a totally great point with Maxis really, and I remember SimCity, Sim Farm, those early games, even the Sims Online. When Will Wright had done
Sims
that.
Online.
I was going to say 20 probably years ago or something, kind of ahead of its time with letting people, build a character and build your environment. That's still, The Sims is a very vibrant franchise for EA right now. Is there sort of an opportunity to do more there? I look at, what Roblox is doing and Fortnite Creative and things like that. Like it seems like Sims out of all your franchises is the one that maybe is best equipped to sort of play in this world.
Yes, a lot of fertile ground here for Sims for sure. And the idea that we will build on the tools for people to play with life. That's our brand simulation. And the idea that people will be able to play with life together. And to your point, we had Sims Online that came out in 2002. So it was almost 20 years ago, which I can't believe. We certainly were ahead of our time. And I think 20 years later, we've learned a lot about how players interact, what motivates players, how players can come together cooperatively. And so, as you would imagine, as we think about the next generation of Sims, super important for us to have the best tools, the most flexibility, and for players to really expand on their creativity, remix items and objects in the world, and then do that together. And I think that's one of our biggest opportunities with The Sims is the social connection and component that we need to bring to this brand and this franchise. And the team is hard at work on the next generation of that experience.
Yeah, I think almost the create and then the share aspect of that. And I think being able to, build things that you can share with other people. Like I remember years ago, Blizzard tried a thing, was a failed experiment with Diablo of like sort of this marketplace, but it's almost like creating this like player economy, which I could see at some point even happen in a Sims where people could, build items. And that happens sort of on the edge of the internet with people creating, items that you can bring into games and 3D models and stuff like that. But I imagine like as a Sims sort of becoming more of even a platform for creativity feels like an opportunity.
Absolutely. And it's us being able to create a framework, and that players are actually going to create these experiences. And again, as they're doing it together, they're doing it collaboratively. They are sharing. They could create marketplaces, and what we arm them with, and the capabilities and frameworks we arm them with, and then where they take that, I think is going to be a pretty significant surprise and a pretty exciting time for us as we bring these tools and this platform to market.
And a good recruiting tool as well, because you can find some amazing talent out there. I think. I mean, that's like when I was growing
Yeah.
up, a lot of the mod makers, are like the designers now at
Oh,
these
for
game
sure.
companies. That's where it started. So I just think it's such an
Oh,
awesome way for people
absolutely.
to just show their talents. The last one I'll ask you about is a game that got a lot of attention last year when you teased it was coming back, which is Skate. And I think of like
Ooh.
Skate 3, design your own skate park. Like it feels like that franchise. Everyone is so excited that you guys are building it again and doing a new one. But is that another one where sort of tools will be a player tools, I guess, will be a key piece of the experience?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Skate 3, and it's such a, again, ahead of its time a bit. I mean, it was about creative expression and about being together and showing off what you created and hanging out. So, yes, I mean, I think that was the draw and the attraction and the excitement around that game experience. For this next Skate, we've brought back a lot of our creative leaders that were part of the previous Skate experience. And then we also hired Dan McCullough, who ran Xbox Live platform at Microsoft, to come run the whole project. So you can imagine, add those things up, you can imagine where we're taking this franchise and this brand in the future. You have someone that ran a very social live platform mixed with the incredible creative team that brought you Skate before. We think there's a ton of potential to reimagine what that experience can be.
So this sort of player tool revolution, for lack of a better term, will roll out across games. Do you think players are they ultimately going to be using the same tools that developers are using? Like I know for many years, everyone would talk about EA's Frostbite and the positive aspects of it, and sometimes the challenges. I think that teams sort of almost had to use it or were strongly compelled to use it. Now it feels like your games are being built on multiple engines. Like, do you feel like there's like a standard tool set that like Unreal obviously has a tool set that people build games with? How does EA think about like creating these tools, and is it different what developers are going to use versus players?
I do. I think that our developers, I mean, keep in mind, we have some incredibly sophisticated software engineers, game designers, artists that have been doing this a long time. And we have very large teams. We have teams of hundreds of people that create game experiences together. They are going to require perhaps more sophisticated, more advanced tools than perhaps we would put out into the user community or into our player community. I think for our player community, again, the goal has to be about accessibility. I really want players to feel like it's intuitive and that they can easily come in and have an impact on their experience. Now, to your point, would we put out advanced tools and something like the old PC mod days? Perhaps that will be an opportunity. But I would say that we are going to have perhaps more advanced engine workflows and tools for our game developers, because this is what they do for a living and what they've been educated to do, and they're probably more advanced than maybe some of the more mass players who we would want to be able to come in and tinker with the game experience.
Now, it would not be a Dean Takahashi conference if we didn't talk about the metaverse and where
Oh
everything is
gosh,
going
that
into the
whole thing.
future, which is, such a overused term in many ways these days. But I do think it's interesting to get your perspective, leading a studio organization at EA, one of the world's biggest video game interactive entertainment producers. Like, you guys, I'm sure you talk about the metaverse, but like, what does it mean at EA? Like, is it building this, EA Sports metaverse? Is there an EA verse? Like, is there a big theme park that you're going to make with all your franchises? Like, how do you even kind of tackle that concept of the metaverse?
That's such a good question. And it is just so broadly used, that term, and broadly interpreted, right? As far as
Yeah.
what it can mean. I mean, we really see it, and the way that we think about it is it's a spatial and experiential evolution really of the existing internet, right? So it's going to be a 3D experience of the actual internet. Is probably the true definition of what the metaverse is. We are looking at it as bringing multiple experiences together. And there's a few buckets about how you can think about that. It could be as simple as a layer that connects multiple experiences. So it could be like a shopping mall. You go into one door and you have one experience. You go into another and you have another experience. And the hub that connects those experiences could be a social place. It could be a place of gathering, social gathering. The other way to think about it is that it really comes from a game experience. And so we were talking about skate earlier. So skate could be a game experience that starts in a certain feature set and can expand, and it can be a place that people come together. They can build things in a world. They can share, interact with other players. So I think that a metaverse experience that starts with a game experience and builds from there. I mean, like Fortnite. Fortnite has concerts in it, and they certainly are looking to expand what that definition of what that game once was, is different today than it was then. And I think they're thinking about that. So I think that's an interesting way to approach it. And then there's perhaps more of what we think of a Ready Player One kind of, again, that 3D experiential place, the sense of place that you walk through a world. And I really love to think about our sports opportunity in that area, and that there are so many ways that you can consume sports media, and whether it be watching real sports games, checking data, connecting and talking with friends about sports, playing sports, and comparing that. So I think we have opportunities everywhere across the company, in with our franchises and our brands, to really explore out and push out the definition of metaverse in those buckets that I talked about. There are some foundational things about the metaverse, and we talked about them a lot earlier. I think creativity and self-expression and creating your own objects is certainly an important one, which I think, again, the value of creating capabilities for players is super important and foundational. And then, of course, the aggregation of masses, the aggregation of bringing a lot of people together, is another really important foundation of the concept of a metaverse that I think are going to have to be factors in how you think about pulling that experience together, the technology that's required, and then just the pure design, and what that means for consumers.
Yeah, and I think what's also happening, at least I sense, is that some of the social media platforms are kind of experimenting in this world. And certainly Facebook's, done a lot in sort of AR, VR, and Snapchat with Bitmojis and everything. And so there's these social networks kind of playing in this space to some degree. And then there are the game companies that are, becoming more social, but using sort of games and interactivity at the core of it. And I'm curious, I sense this sort of coming, not conflict, but sort of, tug of war between sort of game companies and social networks to sort of figuring out how this all ultimately manifests itself as this metaverse. And I always think that gaming and interactivity really is going to be the core of what you're going to do there. You're not just going to chat with people. You're actually going to want to do things, and think of, EA Sports, like the killer mini golf game that you guys could do, or things like that, sort of in these spaces. Like, how, not that you're going to release a $60 mini golf game, but like, it would be really fun to have sort of, something that you could play with your friends and do that. And I'm just curious, like, how does that factor into your roadmap at EA when you're used to doing these, traditional kind of yearly sports releases? And I remember there was like EA Sports Big and other things off the side. Like, do you look at that and say, hey, there's something fun we could do in this space? And I guess my big question is like, well, what does that look like? Like, is it this sort of free to enter, EA Sports verse, or is it, as you said, is it a mode of FIFA, right? And like, how do you start to sort of, introduce those concepts into this?
I mean, people are, you and I talked about live services earlier today, right? And so this, the idea that people interact with us every day as it is, and we show up every day to provide experiences. I think some of it is going to be knitting some of these together. I like your idea in thinking about how to think about our content in a different way. Do we work for 4 or 5 years creating a big epic drop of a game launch versus, hey, we can have episodic content, so we can have programming, almost like TV programming across an experience. And so I think some of the fundamentals may exist, but perhaps the consumption and how we launch them and how we serve them to players could change in a world like this. I think would be incredibly interesting. And I think game companies are incredibly well positioned and well poised to lead in this area. I think the things that we've been doing for decades in creating worlds, creating social experiences, creating shared experiences for people, that the scale of that technology, the scale, the broad global reach in bringing these experiences together. I don't see any other entertainment medium or social platform with the ability to do what we have done in the past year. So I think it's going to be a really great evolution and a great build, and the connection of a lot of things that we do coming together for the future of this idea of an aggregation of a lot of people coming together and having shared experiences.
EA has such a diverse portfolio of games. I remember a few years ago there was lots of drama about, was EA no longer making single player games? Everything was multiplayer. And then he came out with, Jedi Fallen Order, which was, an amazing story driven game. And now we're talking about, the metaverse and live service and mobile. And then you bring in Glue and Codemasters. I'm curious, like when you look at all these opportunities, like the metaverse is clearly a huge, idea at least. How do you apportion, resources towards something like that? Like it's fun to brainstorm, but then you've got all these games to ship, you've got all these different priorities. Like, how do you decide on the development side how to even, scale that or begin to resource that?
Well, I think that I at Electronic Arts and with our creative teams, a lot of these ideas and experiences need to come from the game teams, and that they need, because they are so close to their players, and I think that they really can see the big picture about how to bring these experiences together. And then we have technology requirements that is a platform, and we as a company have been investing in that for a long time. We have a player network. We are one of the few companies, to your point, we have a broad breadth of games and diverse franchises and brands. Electronic Arts is one of the only games in the industry where if you came into Sims, we would recognize you, Jeff Keighley, as you're in Sims, and you could come in and play FIFA, and you can come in and play Battlefield, and we know who you are when you come in. And we're one of the few companies that actually has that unique user ID across all of our games. And I think that our investment and prioritization in connecting with our players and knowing you and recognizing you as you're coming through our experience is going to serve us really well as a foundation. So I think we have a lot of big parts and pieces to this. And to your point, I think that the vision will come from, perhaps a sports leader. And then we talked about, the potential of the Sims being something that could grow. Skate could grow. Apex, the team at Respawn just has some, pretty big ambitions and excitement around where they're going to be bringing Apex. And so I think that those creative leaders will bring that. And I think Electronic Arts, we as a scaled company and organization need to provide really meaningful platform and foundation for that we already have a pretty good head start on.
All right. Well, I'm calling EA Sports Mini Golf. I'm ready for it.
You heard it here. You heard it here,
I was
everyone.
going to say,
The big
there's the
idea.
big announcement for Dean. All right. Well, Laura, it's always great chatting with you. A very exciting times in games. It feels like it always is, right? I mean, it's
It is.
never dull.
Nope. Pretty exciting.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Jeff,
Thanks,
so
Laura.
much. And
Appreciate it.
thank you. Thanks.